Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Ruhle. It may feel like the 2020 presidential race is just getting warmed up, but Democratic candidate John Delaney has been on the trail since summer of 2017 when he traded a congressional re-election bid for a shot at the White House. Former Maryland Congressman John Delaney joins me now. Congressman, welcome. Tell me what your time on the campaign has taught you about the American people, and specifically Democrats, because we've learned specifically this month that Twitter Democrat and the actual Democrat out there in this country want very different things.
Absolutely. I think what most Americans want is what most Democrats want, which is to stop the noise. I think they're just tired of all this fighting, and they want us to actually start getting some things done. Democrats in particular obviously want Trump out of the White House. I think that's the number one issue that Democrats will focus on in this election, and I think that will ultimately be the criteria and who they choose as our nominee, as someone who can beat the president. But in general, I think Democrats are like most Americans. They want us to stop the fighting. They want us to start solving some problems. They want us to get some things done. They want us to kind of be optimistic about our future as opposed to what we're hearing from our leaders now. They want leaders who put them ahead of their partisan politics.
What problems are most important to those people? Just today, Beto O'Rourke released this sweeping $1 trillion plan to address climate change. The Climate Solutions Caucus was one you were a part of. How do you convince voters that this is something they need to make a top priority? Because while you might understand it, many have said you got to help the poor and middle class across this country today, and climate change doesn't matter to them as a number one priority or a $1 trillion spend.
Well, the number one priority is health care. That's what you hear about all the time. Health care, pharmaceutical prices. We really have a broken health care system. Health care costs continue to go up faster than inflation, and it's really affecting the American people. The other issue you hear a lot about in Iowa, for example, is how there's no jobs in rural America and small towns. Right? The economic data on a macro level is good in this country, but as we all know, it's not evenly distributed. And a lot of small towns in Iowa in particular have been drained of people and of talent and of opportunities. That comes up all the time. And they do care about climate change, but we have to solve climate change in a way that doesn't break the back of working Americans, right? That's the key to how to deal with climate change, which is why I'm so oriented towards innovation. I think we can innovate our way out of this problem. I think we need almost a deep decarbonization strategy, right, where we actually invest in the next wave of innovation to extract carbon from the atmosphere, locate that in rural America. Those are the kind of things that I think resonate with people. If you can show how we'll deal with climate and create jobs, that's a winning formula.
Then what do you do about the economy? Because those jobs lost in rural America, President Trump honed in on that.
Yes.
Right? When President Obama was in his last State of the Union, he was talking about the great economy. Trump walked in and said, great economy, it couldn't be more broken. Fast forward till today, we've got that same economic picture, and President Trump calls it great, and people across the board are repeating him.
That's right. I mean, again, they're not looking at the facts. They're not looking at what's going on. They're not going to Lordstown, Ohio and seeing plants closing, right? They're not talking about how this trade war with China is actually really hurting rural America. So he hasn't, I mean, look, he was right to identify what's happened. The fact that there's all this concentration of opportunity in a handful of places, New York, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, D.C., a couple other places, and so much of this country has been left behind. But he hasn't proposed anything to deal with the problem, unlike what I'm talking about. I'm talking about doing things like increasing the earned income tax credit, which is the absolute best way to help working Americans. I'm talking about requiring a certain percentage of government contractors, right, to have half of their employees in rural America. I'm talking about dealing with climate change in a way where we build a CO2 pipeline, right? If we're ever going to actually deal with climate change, we're going to have to start extracting carbon out of the atmosphere, right, and putting it back into the earth. And we're going to need a whole new pipeline network in this country. And in my judgment, it should be located in the heartland so that we can move manufacturing there. The closer manufacturing is located to a carbon pipeline, the easier it will be for them to actually capture carbon and send it to a place where we can actually put it back in the earth. Things like that are prescriptive to the problems we have in this country, and they also create jobs in the middle of the country.
President Trump thinks deregulation brings jobs back, especially around small businesses. But I think payday lenders, regulation that we saw help and protect the little guy. That's why we put regulation in place. How do you see deregulation?
See, what I don't like is duplicative regulations. right? I don't like when we have multiple government agencies trying to regulate the same thing, right? Because then you get this kind of lowest common denominator. As someone who ran two businesses, took them public, had to deal with the regulatory environment, I've seen how that can actually kind of clog the gears, if you will. But things like you're talking about, which is regulations that protect people, right? Those he's really kind of diluted. Think about what he hasn't done with privacy. I mean, we have no privacy legislation in this country. I mean, California passed something that was pretty significant, and there's nothing being done at the federal level. He's not leading us in a conversation about that. He's gutted the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. His chief of staff technically runs that thing, right? Which means no one's running it.
Which means no one's running it, and you're looking to run the country. Congressman, last question to you quickly. Joe Biden is now in the race. How does that change things?
Doesn't change things. I mean, let's face it, for months people have talked about the vice president running. I think we got a big field. The Washington Post poll that just came out shows that it's wide open. More than half the American people have no idea who they want to vote for. This is going to be a battle of ideas, and this is going to be a battle about who can try to bring this country together and start solving problems, because that's what the American people are looking for.
Race is wide open. You got to be in it to win it, and Congressman Delaney is.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.